My name is Sophia Harlow, and despite everything I've achieved, I was never good enough for my family. But that night, everything changed. Before I share my story, let me know where you're watching from and hit like and subscribe if you've ever had to walk away from someone who refused to see your worth. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was sitting in a boardroom worth more than most people's houses, negotiating deals that would reshape entire city blocks. While my father still introduced me as my daughter who works in real estate, not as the senior partner at Meridian Crown Development, not as the woman who turned a modest inheritance into a multi-million-dollar empire, just ... His daughter, who worked in real estate. I was 32, and I'd been building my fortress of success brick by brick since I was 25. 7 years of 16-hour days, of turning down social invitations, of choosing spreadsheets over relationships. 7 years of proving myself in a world that seemed designed to keep women like me on the sidelines, but it was never enough for. Richard Harlow, my father, was what you call old money. Not the kind that traces back to the Mayflower, but the kind that had been accumulating in Saratoga Springs for 3 generations. He owned half the historic district, had his name on a wing of the hospital, and believed that real success was measured by how many people knew your name at the country club. Real estate development, he'd say with that particular tone he reserved for things that disappointed him, is just construction with a fancy name, Vivian. When are you going to do something substantial? Substantial. That word followed me everywhere. My MBA from Wharton? Not substantial enough. I should have gone to Harvard like my cousin Marcus. My penthouse apartment overlooking the Hudson? Not substantial enough. I should have married well and let my husband provide the real estate. My company's portfolio of luxury developments across 3 states? Not substantial enough. I was just playing with Daddy's money. The thing is, I'd stopped using Daddy's money years ago. The initial investment he'd given me for my 25th birthday, a modest $200,000 that he described as play money to get this phase out of your system, had been repaid in full by my 28th birthday. Everything after that was mine. Every deal, every acquisition, every triumph was built on my own vision and relentless work. But Richard Harlow had a selective memory. When it came to his daughter's independence, the morning everything changed started. Like any other. I was in my office on the 32nd floor of the Meridian Tower. Yes, I'd named the building after my company, reviewing the final contracts for what would be my most ambitious project yet. The old Riverside Mills complex, a sprawling industrial site that had been abandoned for 20 years, was about to become the crown jewel of Saratoga Springs' downtown revitalization. My assistant, Jordan, knocked and entered with that particular expression that meant family drama was about to interrupt my day. "Your father's office called," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "The annual Harlow Foundation Gala is next Friday. Black tie. They're expecting you to attend." As the rising star of the family business, I looked up from the contracts, feeling that familiar tightness in my chest. The family business? I don't work for the family business. I know that. You know that. But apparently the guest list doesn't know that. The Harlow Foundation Gala was my father's pride and joy, an annual event that raised money for various local charities while serving as a showcase for the Harlow family's continued prominence in Saratoga Springs society. It was also where he made his annual speech about legacy, tradition, and the importance of family values in every year. He'd find a way to make it clear that while he was proud of his children's hobbies, the real work, the substantial work, was being done by him. I'd been attending these galas since I was 18, watching my father hold court while my achievements were mentioned in passing, if at all. This year, though, felt different. This year, I had something that even Richard Harlow couldn't dismiss. "Jordan," I said, a plan beginning to form in my mind, "I need you to prepare a presentation package for the Riverside Mills project. Full. Portfolio, architectural renderings, financial projections, the works, and I need you to call Harrison and Associates." "The jewelers?" "The jewelers. I need to commission something special." The Harrison and Associates showroom was the kind of place where they served champagne while you browsed and never asked if you could afford what you were looking at. They'd been creating custom pieces for Saratoga Springs Elite for over 60 years, and their reputation for discretion was as valuable as their craftsmanship. Miss Harlow, William Harrison greeted me personally, which was his way of acknowledging that I was the kind of client who made his monthly numbers worthwhile. How can we help you today? I need something commissioned for next Friday, I said, settling into the plush leather chair across from his desk. Something that represents both success and legacy. I explained what I had in mind, watching his eyebrows rise as I described the specifics. By the time I finished, he was leaning forward with the kind of interest of expensive commissions always inspired. It's ambitious, he said, but absolutely doable. The symbolism is quite striking. That's the point. The piece I commissioned was a custom watch, not just any watch, but a masterpiece of design and engineering. The face was made from reclaimed wood from the original Riverside Mills building, surrounded by a platinum case engraved with the architectural outline of the new development. The band was crafted from leather sourced from the same supplier that had provided materials for the mill's original machinery. It was a perfect fusion of old and new, of heritage and innovation. It told the story of transformation, of taking something forgotten and making it magnificent again. It was also worth more than most people's cars. The inscription. William asked, pen poised over his notepad. To the future we build together, I said. From VH to RH, with love and respect for all you've taught me. The words felt like glass in my mouth, but they were necessary. This gift had to be perfect, not just in its craftsmanship, but in its message. It had to show my father that I understood the value of legacy, that I was building something substantial, that I was worthy of the Harlow name. More than that, it had to show everyone else at the gala that Vivian Harlow was no longer the young woman playing with daddy's money. I was a force to be reckoned with, and this gift would be my declaration of war against their low expectations. The week that followed was a blur of final preparations. The Riverside Mills contracts were signed. The architectural team was already breaking ground, and the first phase of development was scheduled to begin the following month. The project had been featured in Architectural Digest and the Wall Street Journal, with industry experts calling it a masterclass in urban revitalization. But I knew that none of that would matter to my father unless I could make him see it through his own lens of what constituted success. The night before the gala, I stood in my apartment looking out at the city lights that twinkled like stars. Below, somewhere out there, construction crews were working through the night on projects I greenlit. Families were living in homes I developed, and businesses were thriving in commercial spaces I designed. I'd built an empire. But tomorrow night, I'd find out if any of it was enough to earn the respect of the man who taught me that love was something you had to achieve, not something you were given. The Saratoga Springs Country Club had been transformed into something out of a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in silk, while perfectly arranged centerpieces of white roses and eucalyptus created an atmosphere of understated elegance. The kind of elegance that whispered money instead of shouting it. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, a midnight blue dress by Carolina, a rare that hugged every curve while maintaining an air of sophistication. My jewelry was minimal but statement-making. Diamond earrings that caught the light, a simple platinum bracelet, and a ring that had belonged to my grandmother. I looked like success, but the kind of success that knew how to move through these circles without causing a scene. The custom watch was in a velvet box in my clutch, its weight both reassuring and terrifying. As I made my way through the crowd, I could feel the familiar mixture of admiration and assessment that followed me at these events. I was the Harlow daughter who'd made something of herself, the one who'd managed to build a career without embarrassing the family name. But I was also the one who'd chosen work over marriage, ambition over tradition, independence over the security of staying in the family fold. Vivian! My cousin Marcus approached with his usual politician smile, champagne glass in hand. You look absolutely stunning. How is the real estate game treating you? It's not a game, Marcus, I replied. accepting the kiss on the cheek. That served as greeting in our family. How is the law firm? Thriving, thanks for asking. Dad's been telling everyone about the Morrison case. You know, the one where we saved the city $500,000 in litigation costs. Sometimes I think he's prouder of nothing than his own sons. Uncle James had indeed been bragging about Marcus's legal victories, just as he did every year. Marcus was 35, had made partner at his firm 2 years ago, and was engaged to a woman whose family owned a string of boutique hotels across New England. In the Harlow family hierarchy, he was the golden boy, the one who'd chosen a respectable profession, who was settling down properly, who understood how to leverage success into social status. That's wonderful, I said, meaning I'd never resented Marcus for his success, only for the way it was celebrated while mine was tolerated. Uncle James must be thrilled. He is, but you know what? I think Uncle Richard might be even more proud of you. He's been telling everyone about your latest project, the mill thing. Says it's the kind of development that really puts Saratoga Springs on the map. I felt a flutter of hope in my chest. He said that. Oh, absolutely. He was going on about how you inherited the Harlow eye for investment, how you're carrying on the family tradition of building something lasting. I think tonight might be the night he finally admits you're doing something substantial. That word again, substantial. But this time, it didn't feel like a judgment. It felt like a possibility. The evening progressed as these events always did. Cocktail hour filled with careful conversations and strategic networking, followed by dinner and my father's annual speech about the importance of giving back to the community. He spoke about legacy, about the responsibility that came with success, about the ways that each generation had to build upon the foundation laid by those who came before. And then, as the evening wound down and the crowd began to thin, my father approached me with that particular expression that meant he had something important to say. "Vivian," he said, his voice carrying the weight of formality that always preceded his most significant conversations. "I'd like you to join me in the library. There's something we need to discuss." The country club's library was a sanctuary of dark wood and leather-bound books, the kind of room where important decisions were made and family business was conducted. My father settled into one of the wingback chairs, gesturing for me to take the seat across from him. "I've been thinking about your development project," he began, his tone measured and serious. "The Riverside Mills complex. What about it? It's ambitious. Expensive. Risky." He paused, studying my face. "It's also exactly the kind of project that can make or break a company your size." I felt my stomach tighten. "The financing is solid. Dad, the architectural team is world-class, and the market research supports every aspect of the development. It's not risky, it's strategic." "Strategic," he repeated, the word carrying a weight I couldn't quite interpret. "That's an interesting way to describe gambling with your company's future. It's not gambling, it's vision." Vision. He leaned back in his chair, and I caught a glimpse of the expression that had intimidated business rivals for 30 years. "Let me tell you about vision, Vivian. Vision is what built the Harlow name in this town. Vision is what turned a small construction company into a real estate empire. Vision is what ensures that a family business survives and thrives for generations." "I understand that, do you?" He leaned forward again, his voice dropping to the tone he used when he was about to deliver what he considered an important lesson. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're about to risk everything you've built on a project that's too big for you to handle." The words hit me like a physical blow. Too big for me to handle? After everything I'd accomplished after every deal I closed and every challenge I'd overcome, he still saw me as the little girl playing with Daddy's money. "The project is solid," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "The numbers work, the timeline is realistic, and the team is working for you, not with you. There's a difference." He stood up, moving to the window that looked out over the country club's perfectly manicured grounds. "I've been watching you for 7 years, Vivian. You're talented, driven, intelligent. But you're also stubborn and you have a tendency to bite off more than you can chew. I've never failed to deliver on a project. You've never attempted a project of this scale." He turned back to me and I saw something in his expression that made my heart race. "Which is why I'm prepared to offer you a partnership." Partnership. The word hung in the air between us like a challenge. "What kind of partnership?" "Harlow Development Group takes on the Riverside Mills project as a joint venture. We provide the additional capital, the established relationships, the institutional knowledge that comes with 30 years in this business. In return, we maintain controlling interest in the project, and you retain a significant ownership stake." I stared at him, processing the implications. "You want to buy me out. I want to help you succeed. There's a difference. By taking control of my company's most important project, by ensuring that the project succeeds, by making sure you don't risk everything you've built on a gamble that's too big for you to handle alone. Too big for me to handle alone." There it was again, the assumption that I was still the little girl who needed daddy's protection, who couldn't be trusted with the real decisions, and if I decline. He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him weighing his words carefully. "Then you proceed on your own, with my blessing and my hopes for your success. But without the safety net that comes with family support, safety net." As if my 7 years of building Meridian Crown development from nothing was just an elaborate way of playing it safe. "I need to think about it," I said, standing up from the chair that suddenly felt too small, too confining. "Of course. Take all the time you need, but Vivian?" He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. "Success isn't just about being right. It's about being smart enough to recognize when you need help." I watched him leave, feeling the weight of the custom watch in my clutch like a stone in my stomach. I'd commissioned it as a symbol of respect, of gratitude, of the legacy we were building together. But sitting in that library, surrounded by the trappings of old money and older assumptions, I realized that I'd misunderstood something fundamental about our relationship. My father didn't see me as a partner. He saw me as a liability. The presentation of the gift was supposed to be a private moment between father and daughter, but nothing in the Harlow family happened in private. By the time I composed myself and returned to the main ballroom, a small crowd had gathered around the bar area, where my father was holding court. "Ah, there she is," he said as I approached, his voice carrying that particular tone of fond indulgence he used when he wanted to signal that family business was being conducted. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet my daughter, Vivian. She's the one I was telling you about, the one with the ambitious development project." The crowd turned to look at me with the kind of polite interest that social occasions demanded. I recognized most of the faces: business associates, family friends, members of the country club's board of directors. People who know me since I was a child, but who still saw me through the lens of my father's interpretation of my achievements. "Your father was just telling us about the Riverside Mills project," said Margaret Whitmore, the wife of the bank president. "It sounds absolutely fascinating. Such a big undertaking for someone so young. As if 32 was barely out of college, as if I hadn't been building my company for 7 years. "It's definitely ambitious," I replied, forcing a smile. "But I believe in taking calculated risks when the opportunity is right." "Calculated risks," my father repeated, and I caught the slight emphasis he placed on the word calculated. That's exactly what we were discussing, actually. The importance of having the right support system when you're taking on something this significant. He was doing it again, undermining my authority while appearing to be supportive, making it clear to everyone present that my project was too big for me to handle alone, that I needed family intervention to succeed. "Speaking of support," I said, reaching into my clutch and retrieving the velvet box, "I have something for you, Dad. A small token of my appreciation for everything you've taught me about building something lasting." The conversation around us quieted as I handed him the box. This was the moment I'd been planning for weeks, the moment when I would show everyone, that I understood the value of legacy, that I was worthy of the Harlow name. He opened the box, and I watched. His expression changed as he took in the custom watch. For a moment, I thought I saw genuine surprise, even appreciation in his eyes. The craftsmanship was undeniable, the symbolism clear. "This is remarkable," he said, lifting the watch from its velvet nest. "The detail work is extraordinary. The face is made from reclaimed wood from the original mills," I explained, aware that our small audience was listening intently. "The engraving shows the architectural outline of the new development. It's a celebration of transformation, of taking something from the past and making it part of the future." "How thoughtful," Margaret Whitmore said, leaning closer to examine. "The watch. What an interesting way to commemorate the project." "It's more than that," I said, my voice growing stronger as I spoke. "It's a symbol of what we can accomplish when we honor our heritage while embracing innovation. The mills employed hundreds of people in their heyday. The new development will bring jobs, housing, and economic growth to the area. It's not just about profit. It's about building something that will benefit the community for generations." My father was still examining the watch, turning it over in his hands to read the inscription. When he looked up at me, I saw something in his expression that I couldn't quite read. "To the future we build together," he read aloud, and I felt a flutter of hope in my chest. "That's a beautiful sentiment, Vivian." "I meant every word of it. I'm sure you did." He carefully placed the watch back in its box, then set the box on the bar. "It's a lovely gift, truly, but I'm afraid I can't accept it." The words hit me like a physical blow. Around us, the conversation stopped entirely, and I could feel the weight of a dozen pairs of eyes watching this moment unfold. "I'm sorry," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "The symbolism is beautiful, but it's premature. This watch celebrates a project that hasn't been built yet, a future that hasn't been secured. It's..." He paused, and I saw him glance at the faces around us. It's the kind of gesture that assumes success before it's been earned. The humiliation was swift and complete. In front of everyone who mattered in Saratoga Springs society, my father had just made it clear that my achievements were insufficient, my plans were premature, and my gesture of respect was presumptuous. "I see," I said, my voice steady despite the fact that my hands were trembling. "I misunderstood the situation." "It's not that I don't appreciate the thought," he continued, and I realized he was still talking, still making this moment more excruciating. "It's that I've always taught you the importance of earning your victories before you celebrate them. This watch represents a hope, not an accomplishment." A hope, not an accomplishment. 7 years of building my company, of proving myself in an industry that didn't welcome women, of creating something substantial and lasting, and he saw it as a hope. "Of course," I said, reaching for the velvet box. "I'll save it for when the project is complete." But he moved the box away from my reach. "Actually, I think it might be better if you held on to it altogether." As a reminder of the importance of realistic expectations, the cruelty of it took my breath away. Not only had he rejected the gift, but he'd done it in a way that made it clear he considered my expectations unrealistic, my confidence misplaced. "I understand," I said, though I was no longer sure I understood anything about this family or my place in it. "Good, I knew you would." He turned back to the crowd, effectively dismissing me from the conversation. "Now, where were we?" "Oh, yes." Margaret was asking about the foundation's plans for next year. I stood there for a moment, invisible in the middle of my father's social circle, holding a gift that had been designed to represent respect and legacy, but had instead become a symbol of my own naivete. And then, with a clarity that felt like ice water in my veins, I realized exactly what I needed to do. I excused myself from the group and made my way to the country club's ladies' lounge, where I could think clearly without the weight of curious eyes and whispered conversations. The lounge was empty except for the attendant, who took one look at my face and discreetly busied herself with arranging hand towels. I sat in one of the plush chairs and pulled out my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found the number. I needed Harrison and Associates After Hours line. "William? It's Sophia Harlow. I need to make a small modification to my commission." "Yes, tonight." I'll pay the emergency fee. 20 minutes later, I was back in the ballroom, moving through the crowd with the kind of focused purpose that made people step aside without really knowing why. I found my father where I'd left him, still holding court near the bar, the velvet box containing the rejected watch sitting on the surface like a monument to my humiliation. "Excuse me," I said, my voice carrying just enough volume to ensure that everyone in the immediate vicinity would hear what came next. "I need to retrieve my property." My father looked up, his expression shifting from mild annoyance to something approaching concern as he registered the change in my demeanor. "Vivian, the watch," I said, reaching for the velvet box. "Since you've made it clear that it's inappropriate for you to accept it, I'll be taking it back." "There's no need to. Actually, there is." I opened the box and removed the watch, holding it up so that the custom engraving caught the light. "Since you mentioned that this represents a hope rather than an accomplishment, I thought you might be interested to know that the hope became reality about 6 hours ago." The conversation around us stopped completely. I could feel the weight of attention, the anticipation of drama that always made these social gatherings more interesting than anyone wanted to admit. "What are you talking about?" my father asked, his voice carrying a warning that I chose to ignore. "The Riverside Mills project, the one you consider too big for me to handle alone." I slipped the watch onto my own wrist, where it looked perfect against my dress. "I'm pleased to announce that, as of this afternoon, Meridian Crown Development has been awarded the contract for the complete revitalization of the downtown historic district. Not just the mills, but the entire 6-block area surrounding them." The silence was deafening. Margaret Whitmore's champagne glass was halfway to her lips, forgotten. Uncle James was staring at me with his mouth slightly open. Even my father looked stunned. "The contract was finalized this afternoon," I continued, my voice steady and professional. "The total project value is $47 million. The timeline is 18 months for Phase 1, with Phases 2 and 3 to follow over the next 5 years. It's the largest urban development project in Saratoga Springs history." "How is that possible?" my father asked, and I heard something in his voice that I'd never heard before, genuine shock mixed with what might have been fear. "It's possible because I've spent the last 7 years building relationships, earning trust, and proving that I can deliver on my promises." The city council voted unanimously to award the contract to Meridian Crown Development, not to Harlow Development Group, not to any of the other established firms that submitted proposals. To me. I looked around the circle of faces, seeing the dawning realization that the dynamics of our little social hierarchy had just shifted in a way that none of them had anticipated. "The announcement will be in tomorrow's paper," I continued, "along with the news that I've been invited to serve on the city's Economic Development Committee and that Meridian Crown Development will be opening a second office in Albany to handle our expanding portfolio of projects." My father was still staring at me, and I could see him processing the implications. The rejected gift, the assumption that I needed his help, the suggestion that my expectations were unrealistic. All of it had been based on information that was already obsolete. "Congratulations," he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. "That's quite an achievement. Thank you." I closed the empty velvet box and placed it back on the bar. "I'm sure you understand why I can't accept your partnership offer now. Meridian Crown Development is no longer the small company that might need family support. We're the firm that just became the most significant development player in the region." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Around us, I could hear the whisper of conversations starting up again, but they had a different quality now, the kind of urgent, excited murmur that accompanied truly unexpected news. "I should go," I said, gathering my clutch and straightening my shoulders. "I have calls to make, contracts to review, and a team to coordinate. Building something substantial requires attention to detail." I used his word deliberately, watching his face as he registered the echo of our earlier conversation. The word that had always been used to diminish my achievements had just been transformed into a declaration of my independence. "Vivian," he said as I turned to leave, "we should talk about this privately." "Actually, we shouldn't." I paused, looking back at him and the circle of faces that had witnessed this entire exchange. I've spent 7 years trying to prove myself worthy of a place in this family's definition of success. Tonight, I realized that I've been asking the wrong question. What do you mean? I've been asking whether I'm good enough for the Harlow name. The real question is whether the Harlow name is good enough for what I've built. The silence that followed was different from the shocked quiet of a few minutes earlier. This was the kind of silence that preceded change, that marked the moment when everyone present realized they'd just witnessed something that would be talked about for years to come. Walked out of the Saratoga Springs Country Club with my head high and my custom watch gleaming on my wrist, leaving behind a gift that had been rejected and the family that I'd never seen. Me clearly enough to understand what I was capable of achieving. But my story wasn't over. It was just beginning. The next morning, I woke up in my penthouse apartment to find 17 missed calls on my phone and a stack of newspapers outside my door. The headline of the Saratoga Springs Herald read, "Local developer lands historic contract," with a photo of me from the previous year's business awards ceremony. But it was the smaller headline that made me smile. Harlow daughter builds empire independent of family business. My assistant Jordan arrived at 8 a.m. sharp, carrying coffee and what appeared to be a very full agenda. "Your phone hasn't stopped ringing since 6 a.m., she said, settling into the chair across from my kitchen island. "The mayor's office wants to schedule a press conference. Architectural Digest wants to do a feature story, and ... She paused, consulting her notepad. "Your father's office is called 4 times. What does he want?" "He'd like to schedule a meeting at your earliest convenience. He mentioned something about clearing the air and discussing future collaboration opportunities." I looked out the window at the city spread below me, imagining the construction crews that would soon be transforming the downtown area according to my vision. For the first time in years, I felt truly, completely free. "Call him back," I said. "Tell him I appreciate the call, but I'm focused on my current projects right now. If he'd like to discuss potential collaboration, he can submit a proposal through official channels like any other contractor." Jordan's eyebrows rose. "Official channels?" Meridian Crown Development is the lead contractor on the largest urban development project in the city's history. If Harlow Development Group wants to be considered for subcontractor positions, they'll need to go through the same bidding process as everyone else. I watched Jordan make notes, knowing that this message would find its way back to my father. Within the hour, the man who'd spent 7 years treating my company as a hobby would now have to compete for the privilege of working with me. The irony was delicious. Over the following weeks, I threw myself into the work with an intensity that surprised even me. The rejected gift had been transformative in ways I hadn't expected. It had shown me that I'd been seeking validation from someone who was fundamentally incapable of seeing my worth. That realization had freed me to focus entirely on what I did best, building something extraordinary. The Riverside Mills project became my masterpiece. Where the original mills had employed hundreds of workers in manufacturing, the new development would house thousands of residents, hundreds of businesses, and dozens of professional services. It would be a living, breathing community that honored the past while embracing the future. But more than that, it would be mine. Entirely, completely, unapologetically mine. 3 months after the gala, I received an invitation to another family event, my cousin Marcus's engagement party. The invitation was formal, elegant, and addressed to Miss Vivian Harlow and guest. Not the Harlow family or Mr. and Mrs. Richard Harlow and daughter. Just me as an individual worthy of my own invitation. I almost didn't go. The family dynamics hadn't changed overnight, and I had no interest in subjecting myself to another evening of subtle undermining and backhanded compliments. But then I realized that staying away would send the wrong message. It would suggest that I was bitter, that I was holding grudges, that I was letting personal feelings interfere with family relationships. I wasn't bitter. I was liberated. The engagement party was held at the Whitmore Estate, a sprawling mansion that had been in Margaret's family for 4 generations. The setting was perfect for the kind of celebration that would be written about in the social pages. Elegant, traditional, and expensive enough to make a statement about the families involved. I arrived fashionably late, wearing a dress that had cost more than most people's monthly salary and jewelry that had been featured in Vogue. I looked like success, but more importantly, I felt like success. The kind of success that didn't need anyone's approval or validation. The first person I encountered was my father, who was standing near the entrance greeting guests with the kind of practiced charm that had made him a fixture in Saratoga Springs. Society for 30 years. "Sophia," he said, his voice carrying a warmth that hadn't been there 3 months earlier. "You look absolutely stunning." "Thank you," I replied, accepting the air kiss that served as our family's substitute for genuine affection. "Congratulations on Marcus's engagement. Claire seems like a lovely woman." "She is. Marcus is very lucky." He paused, and I could see him weighing his words carefully. "I was hoping we might have a chance to talk this evening. About the downtown project. About future opportunities for collaboration." "Of course. Though I should mention that if you're interested in working with Meridian Crown Development, you'll need to go through our standard contractor evaluation process. My project manager handles all vendor relationships now." I watched his expression shift as he processed what I'd just said. His daughter was no longer someone who needed his help or guidance. She was someone who had her own project managers, her own vendor relationships, her own processes that he would need to navigate like any other business associate. "I see," he said finally. "Well, I'll have my office reach out to yours to discuss the possibilities." "That would be perfect." The conversation was polite, professional, and completely devoid of the personal dynamics that had defined our relationship for 32 years. He was no longer the father whose approval I desperately sought. I was no longer the daughter who needed his validation to feel worthy. We were simply two business professionals, discussing potential collaboration opportunities. As the evening progressed, I found myself moving through the crowd with a confidence that I'd never felt at these family events. People approached me differently, not as Richard Harlow's daughter, but as Sophia Harlow, the woman who just landed the biggest development contract in the city's history. The questions were different too. Instead of polite inquiries about my little real estate business, I was asked about my expansion plans, my vision for the city's future, my thoughts on urban development trends. I was treated like an expert, a leader, someone whose opinions mattered. It was intoxicating. The evening was winding down when I found myself in the Whitmore Estates garden, looking out over the perfectly manicured grounds that stretched toward the Hudson River. The air was crisp with the promise of autumn, and the lights from the house cast long shadows across the lawn. I wasn't alone. My father had followed me outside, and I could sense his presence before I heard his footsteps on the gravel path. "Beautiful evening," he said, joining me at the stone balustrade that overlooked the garden's lower level. "It is." We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, and I found myself remembering other evenings like this one, family gatherings, where we'd stepped away from the crowd to have the kinds of conversations that felt too important for public spaces. "I owe you an apology," he said finally, his voice carrying a weight that I hadn't heard before. "For what?" "For not seeing what you were building. For treating your achievements like they were temporary. For assuming that you needed my help, instead of recognizing that you'd already surpassed what I'd accomplished at your age." I turned to look at him, searching his face for signs of the manipulation that had characterized so many of our conversations. But what I saw was something I'd never seen before, genuine humility. "The watch," he continued, "was extraordinary. Not just the craftsmanship, but the thought behind it. The symbolism. I should have accepted it with the grace and gratitude it deserved. Why didn't you?" He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him struggling with something that went deeper than simple pride. "Because I was afraid," he said finally. "Afraid that if I acknowledged how successful you'd become, I'd have to admit that you didn't need me anymore. That everything I built, everything I worked for, was already being surpassed by my own daughter. The honesty of it caught me off guard. This wasn't the Richard Harlow who held court at country club events or intimidated business rivals in boardrooms. This was just a man who'd realized that his need to control had driven away the thing he valued most. "I never wanted to surpass you," I said. "I wanted to make you proud. I know, and I was proud. I'm proud. But I was also terrified that if I admitted it, you'd realize you didn't need the Harlow meme anymore. That you built something so substantial, so independent that our family connection would become irrelevant." I looked out over the garden, processing his words. The man who'd spent 7 years making me feel like my achievements were insufficient had actually been threatened by how much I'd accomplished. "You're right about one thing," I said. "I don't need the Harlow name anymore." "But that doesn't mean—" "I don't value it." "What do you mean?" "I mean that I spent 7 years trying to prove I was worthy of being your daughter. Tonight, I realized that the real question isn't whether I'm good enough for the Harlow legacy. It's whether I want to be part of defining what that legacy becomes." He turned to face me fully, and I saw hope in his expression for the first time in years. And I do. But as an equal partner, not as someone who needs your approval or validation. Meridian Crown Development is my company, my vision, my responsibility. If you want to be part of what I'm building, you'll need to respect that. I can do that, can you? Because it means treating me like a business partner, not like a daughter who needs guidance. It means acknowledging that I might have ideas or approaches that are different from yours. And that different doesn't mean wrong. I understand. Do you? Because 3 months ago, you rejected a gift that represented everything I worked for, in front of everyone who matters in this town. You made it clear that you considered my achievements premature and my confidence misplaced. The words hung in the air between us, and I watched him absorb the full impact of what he'd done. The humiliation, the dismissal, the casual cruelty of it all. "I was wrong," he said quietly. "Completely, utterly wrong, and I'm sorry." "I know you are." But sorry doesn't undo the damage, and it doesn't change the fact that I've built something that exists completely independently of your approval or support. I know that too. I reached in my clutch and pulled out the custom watch, the one that had been rejected 3 months earlier. In the moonlight, the platinum case gleamed and the engraved architectural details seemed to come alive. "This watch was supposed to represent partnership," I said, holding it up so he could see it clearly. "A symbol of the future we could build together, honoring the past while embracing innovation. It's still beautiful. It's more than beautiful. It's prophetic." I slipped the watch onto my wrist, where it had belonged since the night of the gala. Because I did build a future. I did honor the past while embracing innovation. I just did it without you. The words were harsh, but they were also true. And I could see from his expression that he understood exactly what I was saying. "What would it take," he asked, "for you to consider building something together? Respect. Genuine respect for what I've accomplished and what I'm capable of accomplishing. Recognition that I'm not your little girl playing with daddy's money anymore. I'm a business leader who's built something substantial and lasting. You have that. You've always had that, even when I was too stubborn to show it. And partnership. Real partnership. Not you swooping in to save me from projects that are too big for me to handle, but collaboration between two companies that each bring something valuable to the table." "What kind of collaboration?" I smiled, feeling the pieces of a new future clicking into place in my mind. The downtown revitalization project is just the beginning. The city is planning a comprehensive development initiative that will transform the entire riverfront area over the next decade. They'll need multiple firms, multiple perspectives, multiple areas of expertise. You're talking about something unprecedented. I'm talking about something that honors the best of what you've built while incorporating the vision and innovation that I bring to the table. A true partnership between Harlow Development Group and Meridian Crown Development. He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him processing the implications. This wasn't his daughter asking for his help or guidance. This was a peer proposing a business arrangement that would benefit both parties. "I'd like that," he said finally. Very much. Good, then have your office call mine on Monday. We'll set up a formal meeting to discuss the possibilities. A formal meeting? Dad, I said, using the familial address deliberately for the first time that evening. I love you, but I also respect myself too much to ever again be in a position where my professional achievements are subject to your personal approval. If we're going to work together, it has to be as equals. I understand. And Vivian? Yes? Thank you for being strong enough to walk away when I couldn't see what you were worth. For building something so extraordinary that it forced me to recognize my own limitations. For being better than I raised you to be. The admission was more than an apology. It was a recognition that the power dynamic between us had shifted permanently, and that he was grateful for the change rather than resentful of it. You raised me to be exactly what I became, I said. You taught me that success has to be earned, that respect has to be commanded, that legacy has to be built rather than inherited. You just didn't expect me to apply those lessons to our relationship. No, I didn't, but I'm glad you did. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, two business leaders who happened to be father and daughter, looking out over a garden that had witnessed the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. I should go, I said finally. Early morning tomorrow and I have a city to rebuild? Of course. But Vivian? Yes. The watch. It's perfect. It represents exactly what I hope we can build together. Something that honors the past while embracing the future. I smiled, touching the watch face with my fingertip. It took me 3 months to realize that the future it represents was never dependent on your acceptance. It was always mine to build. I know that now. But I'm hoping you'll let me be part of it anyway. We'll see. Make sure your proposal is competitive. I walked back toward the house, leaving him standing in the garden with the weight of everything that had changed between us. The daughter who'd once desperately sought his approval had become a woman who commanded respect on her own terms. The gift that had been rejected had become a symbol of independence rather than devotion, and the future that had once seemed dependent on his validation was now entirely, completely, triumphantly mine. 6 months later, I stood in the penthouse office of Meridian Crown Development's new headquarters, looking out over the construction site that had once been the Riverside Mills. The building was taking shape exactly as I'd envisioned, a perfect blend of industrial heritage and modern innovation, a testament to the power of transformation. My phone buzzed with a text from Jordan. The Times wants to do a profile on you for their Women Who Build series. Also, your father's office sent over the proposal for the riverfront project. It's impressive. I smiled, remembering the formal meeting we'd held 2 weeks earlier. Richard Harlow had arrived at my offices with a comprehensive proposal, detailed architectural plans, and a respectful acknowledgement of Meridian Crown Development's role as the lead contractor on the project. He pitched his company's involvement like any other vendor, professionally, competently, and without a trace of the condescension that had characterized our relationship for so many years. It had been one of the most satisfying business meetings of my career. The riverfront project was ambitious, even by my standards. A 5-year, multi-phase development that would transform 12 blocks of abandoned industrial space into a thriving mixed-use community. It would be the largest urban development project in the region's history, and it would establish Meridian Crown Development as one of the most significant players in the Northeast development market. But more than that, it would be proof that the little girl who'd once played with Daddy's money had built something that would outlast both of us. I looked down at the custom watch on my wrist, the one that had been rejected 8 months earlier, but had become the symbol of everything I'd accomplished since. The face made from reclaimed mill wood caught the afternoon light, and the engraved architectural details seemed to shimmer with possibility. The inscriptions still read, "To the future we build together." But I'd come to understand that the we didn't refer to my father and me. It referred to me and the city I was helping to reshape, me and the team I'd assembled, me and the vision I'd refused to compromise. I built the future. Not with his permission, but with my own determination. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed my father's name, Sophia. I wanted to let you know that the city council approved our joint proposal for the riverfront project. Congratulations, you're now the lead contractor on the largest development initiative in the city's history. Thank you, I said, though. We both knew the congratulations were unnecessary. I'd known we'd win the contract because I designed a proposal that was impossible to refuse. I also wanted to say I'm proud of you. Proud to be working with you. Proud to be your father. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything that had changed between us. He was proud of me not because I finally achieved something he considered substantial, but because I refused to accept his definition of what I was capable of achieving. I appreciate that, I said. I'll see you at the groundbreaking ceremony next week. Actually, about that ... I was thinking it might be appropriate for you to do the honors. This is your vision, your project. You should be the one to break ground. I looked out over the construction site, imagining the ceremony that would mark the beginning of the next phase of my empire. Not the Harlow empire, but mine. Built on my terms, reflecting my vision, serving my definition of what constituted success. I'd like that, I said. I'd like that very much. After I hung up, I sat in the chair that had once felt too big for someone like me, but now felt perfectly suited to everything I'd become. The city spread out below me, full of possibilities and potential. Waiting for the next phase of transformation, I'd spent 7 years trying to prove I was worthy of respect. In the end, I learned that respect wasn't something you earned from others. It was something you commanded by refusing to accept anything less than what you knew you deserved. The watch on my wrist ticked steadily, marking the passage of time that had transformed a hope into an empire, a dream into a legacy, a rejected gift into a symbol of everything I built despite the people who doubted me. I told my father that the real question wasn't whether I was good enough for the Harlow name, but whether the Harlow name was good enough for what I built. Now I knew the answer, wasn't, but that was okay. Because I'd built something better. Have you ever had to choose between peace and family? Sometimes the most powerful revenge is walking away. Not with anger or bitterness, but with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing your worth isn't determined by other people's recognition of it. That night at the country club, when my father rejected the gift I'd commissioned to honor him, I thought it was the end of something. I thought it was proof that I'd failed to earn his respect, that all my achievements were somehow insufficient. But it wasn't the end. It was the beginning of understanding that I didn't need his approval to build something extraordinary. The beginning of recognizing that my success wasn't diminished by his failure to acknowledge it. The beginning of a relationship with myself that was based on what I knew I could accomplish, rather than what others believed I deserved. The custom watch that was rejected that night became the symbol of everything I built afterward. Not because it represented his approval, but because it represented my refusal to accept his judgment as the measure of my worth. I wear it every day now, not as a reminder of what I wanted to achieve, but as a celebration of what I accomplished. Despite everyone who doubted me, the face made from reclaimed millwood reflects the light differently each day, just like the city I've helped transform. The engraved architectural details tell the story of vision becoming reality, of dreams becoming foundations, of a woman who refused to accept anyone else's definition of what she was capable of building. 3 years later, Meridian Crown Development has offices in 4 cities and a portfolio worth more than $100 million. The Downtown Revitalization Project has been featured in international architecture magazines and has become a model for urban development across the country. The Riverfront Project is ahead of schedule and under budget, transforming not just the physical landscape, but the economic future of the entire region. My father and I work together now, as partners in the truest sense of the word, not because I needed his help, but because I chose to offer him the opportunity to be part of something larger than what either of us could build alone. He treats me with the respect I always deserved, and I treat him with the professionalism that our business relationship requires. But the most important thing I built wasn't a company or a development project or a portfolio of properties. It was the unshakable knowledge that my worth isn't determined by other people's recognition of it. That success isn't about earning approval from those who doubt you. It's about having the courage to build something extraordinary, even when they don't believe you can. The gift that was rejected became the foundation of an empire. The daughter who wasn't good enough became the woman who redefined what good enough meant. The future that was dismissed as premature became the present that no one can ignore. If my story resonated with you, hit like, subscribe to Silent Revenge, and share your truth in the comments. Because sometimes justice whispers and still echoes forever. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is becoming so undeniably successful that those who doubted you have no choice but to respect what you've built. Sometimes the best gift you can give yourself is the refusal to accept anyone else's limitations as your own. And sometimes the future you build alone is more beautiful than anything you could have built with someone who never believed in your vision. My name is Sophia Harlow, and I built an empire. Not because I was good enough for the family name, but because I was strong enough to build something better. The watch on my wrist keeps perfect time, marking each moment of a future that belongs entirely to me.